The bright side of addiction is recovery, and recovery is its own best reward. If you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or you simply want to find out more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love who is harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you, as we carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder that all our podcasts can be found at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have included an historic interview with Betty Ford, actor John Larroquette, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, a great interview with musician Bonnie Raitt, authors Brene Brown, Anne Lamott, J.A. Jantz, former NFL players Ryan Leaf and Thomas Hollywood Henderson. All these interviews and more are on our website, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, their path. Welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. We're going to meet today Paul Steinbroner, an award-winning filmmaker and documentary producer. His latest work profiles the amazing rise of the Recovery Café. Here is a quick clip from today's podcast.
I just really love being around recovering people and hearing all the ways, all the miraculous ways they figured out how to, transform the muck and the mire into the lotus flower. How that's impossible, and then you just see it happen. You go, that's miraculous.
My conversation with Paul Steinbroner coming right up. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, with a very sincere, gratitude-felt thank you. Thanks for listening to our podcast. Thanks for telling others about our podcast. There are a lot of podcasts about recovery on the internet. I realize that. Thank you for listening to ours. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. And, following 17 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio here in Seattle, our podcast features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy our podcast and to share it with your friends as well. Recovery is an American way of life. A reminder, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast, supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and, which is most important, most successful treatment programs. Now, although addiction often takes years to progress, then there's a crisis. Then time is of the essence. Now, if you're in recovery, you may have had friends ask you where to find a successful treatment program. Well, encourage them to do their research for sure, as there are many treatment programs for different needs and populations, good, solid treatment programs. But when doing your research, definitely include Sundown M Ranch. They've been successfully treating individuals and families, my gosh, over 55 years. They've done a lot of things right. They're also a nonprofit treatment center, so their rates are among the lowest in the country. And yes, they take major insurance plans. So do yourself a favor. Go to their website, take a quick look-see at what they're doing, about their facility, about their staff, about their programs. Their staff, by the way, has been together a long time, which is a major factor in finding a good treatment center. Their staff is paid well, and they are fully committed to the bottom line. No, not the dollar sign bottom line, but the bottom line of long-term recovery. Be sure and check out their facility and their state-of-the-art treatment services, including photos of their campus, and you can do that at sundown.org. It is where recovery begins, sundown.org. All right, time for a cup of coffee, at least for me, and I invite you to join me with your favorite non-alcoholic beverage as we listen to a candid conversation I had with an award-winning movie producer by the name of Paul Steinbroner. Let's listen. Welcome back once again. Recovery Coast to Coast, America's voice for recovery. So nice to have you with us in this edition of the podcast. I was in Washington, D.C. several months ago for the 44th annual conference of NAATP, which is the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. And they have a big awards banquet on Friday night to start things off. And I'm always interested in who's going to win the Michael Q. Ford Journalism Award. Because for two reasons. Number one, I am very interested in journalism, having been a journalist all my life. And secondly, because Michael Q. Ford and I were dear friends way back when, probably 45, 48 years ago. He and I worked together at the National Council on Alcoholism. He left there to start NAATP, and I helped him out in the first year doing that. And each year, NAATP honors the legacy of Michael Q. Ford by giving a journalism award. And this year, it was given to a guy by the name of Paul Steinbroner. Unfortunately, I did not recognize the name. And then, as they were talking about him, they were talking about Washington State. And I said, whoa, what in the world is going on? And it turns out he is now living in Wenatchee. And he and I go way back. We've had parallel paths in the addictions field for, my gosh, back in the mid-'70s. Paul is a producer, an award-winning producer, and has got probably close to 40 films to his credit over the years. The most recent one is the one I am most interested in, and the one that, frankly, put him in line for the award for the Michael Q. Ford Award in Washington, D.C., and that's a film about the Recovery Café. Now, you probably have heard me talk about the Recovery Café. In fact, when Recovery Coast to Coast was on terrestrial radio, we did an entire show from the Recovery Café with musicians John Batdorf and the Wands. Was with Macklemore and had that big hit called Thrift Shop. So I managed to find Paul during the conference and said, we have got to chat. And I've got to have you on the podcast. And here he is, Paul Steinbroner. Paul, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast. Take us back to the very beginning and made you start doing films about addiction, about recovery, about alcoholism, about gambling, and so much more, uppers, downers, and all-arounders. Your resume is absolutely astounding.
Well, I go back a ways. I go back to actually film. I was a film student at San Francisco State. I graduated high school at a time when everything was happening, and I went to the Haight-Ashbury in 1967. Not everybody knows what that is. I'd seen a lot of people have a lot of dysfunction. I came from a family of nurses. I was interested in helping people, but I just really wanted to be a filmmaker. I just had this drive to just be a filmmaker. And so I lived in San Francisco, lived next to the Jefferson Airplane House. Anyway, I was a struggling film student, made a short film. I ended up meeting the director of detox for the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic and showed him the film, and he didn't put it down or anything. It was not very good. It was like a flip animation film.
Was that Dr. David Smith?
Yeah, David, ran the Haight-Ashbury Clinic. There was a lot of films there. It was just filled with scare techniques and all that stuff. And Dr. Inaba really wanted to talk about physiology, pharmacology, brain chemistry, everything that was coming on. I would sit there in the detox clinic, and in between different people getting their meds and getting counseling, I would be hustling for information. It's like, what's synergism? How does that work? How does this affect the nervous system? How does this affect the heart? And eventually we put a film together called Psychoactive in 1975. But in between, I volunteered for a group called Rock Med. We would go to these concerts, huge concerts run by Bill Graham, and we provide medical services. We would scout the crowd and find people who were really, under a lot of duress and help them get medical attention. So that was the start of it. Finished the first film, really successful. And then tried my hand at other films and worked at TV stations and all kinds of things, and went to grad school at American Film Institute in LA, and then found that I really did want to make just science films. I started, with my partner Bill Cohen and Dr. Inaba, and we made another film called Uppers, Downers, All-Arounders.
A classic, an absolute classic. Yes, a classic. And another film that I found very intriguing back in the day. I think it was mid-'90s. Marijuana, the mirror that magnifies. I love that title.
Right. Well, at some point, they found out that there was a chemical in the brain, an anandamide, that was similar to THC. Some people, well, it's not a drug, but I mean, some people are dysfunctional on it, and they didn't think there was withdrawal, and then they found out there is withdrawal symptoms. So anyway, I went through a whole series of films. I actually made like 50 different films with my company, CNS. I thought, hey, we're all a CNS production, right? Central nervous system. We all got it. So, we made films on cocaine. We made films on, heroin, methamphetamine, worked with a whole variety of people that were specialists in their field, made a film on alcohol, and things kept changing. And as we got closer and closer to understanding brain chemistry, then we just moved more and more in that direction because, our team member, Daryl Inaba, was doctor of pharmacology at UC San Francisco, and we really specialized in that. So we were making films for people that were in treatment who, they get there and they go, how did I get here? I don't understand. Why did that happen? And, then it all can be explained with brain chemistry. This displaces that. Dopaminergic depletion. All drugs basically spill out dopamine, and that's a good feeling, and then you want to keep having that. So what happens over time is the neurotransmitters stop producing their own and depend on the outside stuff. So people find themselves quickly needing the endogenous chemical. That's how it happened. We stayed with that, and we published 8 copies of a textbook that became a classic, which we also called Uppers, Downers, All-Arounders. It grew from like about 150 pages to the last edition was like 600 pages. It was definitive.
Fast forward, Paul, to the Recovery Café, your latest project, and one that is very close to my heart, and I'm sure very close to the hearts of many people who listen to Recovery Coast to Coast. Recovery Café, I believe, started in Seattle, and now there's 50 or 60 of them around the country. How did you get involved with the Recovery Café?
My business partner, Bill, who I'd made 50 films with, died, and I had an encounter with Sheila Ray Charles, the daughter of Ray Charles. She was talking about recovery, and it was just so overwhelmingly important what she was saying, so transformative, all the stuff that she went through, all the changes that she had gone through. I decided, well, rather than make another film on neuropharmacology and brain chemistry, which was, it's obviously important, I said, what is this recovery thing? I wanted to cover the bounce. How do you go from your life is in shambles to you're just glowing, you're shining, you're making a difference in not only your own life, but your families and everybody around you. I started out to make a feature film, and I went to a lot of different places. I went to Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. I hung out with veterans in San Diego at this thing called Stand Down. I spent time with Native Americans at a treatment center in Washington. I went to New Mexico and interviewed Richard Rohr and other people. Spent time with a rabbi in Los Angeles who started a treatment center. As part of this, I saw it. I drove by there and I go, I'm going to have to check this out. So I went and talked to them, and they were very receptive. Ruby Takushi and Killian and David Coffey, they were all, oh, you did what? You want to do this? Sure, come by. We planned a time to come by, and that was in 2017, and I started working on the film. I was working on 5 other films. I gave up the idea of a feature film, and each one of these had its own segment. I proceeded to come back from time to time, and then I was editing all the other ones, and then it was COVID time, and then almost had enough to finish it, but I didn't. I reconnected with them after the whole COVID shutdown thing happened, and then I was able to finish it in June.
Tell our listeners, if you would, the growth of the Recovery Café and how that has just continued to blossom around the country.
Well, as I understand it, I think it started in 2002 or 3. Killian Noe came from Washington D.C. She had an idea. She did some research. She said, "Where's the missing space here in the whole recovery picture?" And it was, you get out of treatment, you're all, "Oh yeah, life is good. Things are fantastic. I'm feeling really good." And then they realize, "I don't have any friends. I can't go back to the place where I used to work. You know what I mean? I'm disconnected with the people that I used to hang out with because it's only going to take me down." And so she said, if there was a place people could go post-acute, get out of treatment phase, where they can really establish their new life, find all positive kinds of things about it, nobody using there, and include good nutrition and maybe some exercise and AA or NA meetings. So it kind of grew from there. It just became really positive. People said, "Well, I can teach a yoga class. Oh, I could teach a writing class." It's a membership organization. All you have to do is show up and basically commit to being in a recovery circle once a week, and then you're there to be known and loved, and listen to other people, and it just like created this tremendous growth. Well, before long, people were calling Killian and David Coffey and saying, "How can we do this here?" And they didn't set out to do that, but then it's like, how can we replicate this? And so it started to happen one at a time, two at a time. I think when I started there in 2017, there was maybe 5 or 6. I think there was one in Spokane and one in San Jose, California. There were just a couple of them. As I was finishing the project, now there's like 50 or 60. I mean, suddenly over COVID, it turns out there's like 17 of them in Indiana. It's like, oh my gosh. It's because it just works. People just really are moved by it. They can move into that space and have community and connection, because I think the thing all of us are looking for is to get out of any situation where it's isolating and lonely. I mean, that's just the poison, struggle with substance use disorder. To get stuck in that spot, it's just horrific. Why not go to a bar? You'll feel better, right? It's like, wow. But to say, no, I don't do that. I belong here. I'm a member of this organization. This is where I belong. This is where I grow.
Ownership.
This is where I become my best self. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the recovery circle. Explain what that is.
Well, it's a situation where so this place is not a drop-in center. You basically get known. You have to commit to being in a circle. Essentially, it's talking about how you are, what's going on in your life, how you feel, your emotions, and when people get to know each other, really get to know each other and care about each other and listen to each other. And I think that's another huge thing. I mean, people want to talk, but they want to be heard first. They really, really want to be heard. And it's such a relief to be heard and not to be told what to do or not to be cross-talked or talked over. It seems to work really well, because some of these recovery circles now have been going for 10, 15 years. They really love that connection and community. I mean, you can't get this in a box. Amazon doesn't deliver this stuff.
I love it. We did our show from there, as I mentioned. It was actually 9 years ago this September. I was just so impressed with what they have done then, what they continue to do now, and the amazing growth. I think it will be eventually in every city. It's kind of like, Starbucks started with one store, and now they're all around the world.
Yeah.
Maybe not to that extent. I see a tremendous growth.
It's funny you say that, because this lady she's a doctor. She's a GP, and she sees people for substance use disorders, and she gives medication. She says, but what I can do is, like, you come back once a week, so what I can do doesn't really take care of what they need, whereas Recovery Cafe does. And she says there should be one of these on every corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Because everybody's got recovering from something.
Absolutely.
And it's just, and we're all craving that.
A connection.
That connection.
Yeah.
And, we would have thought that our phones and devices and platforms and social media would bring us that closeness, but in most cases it really hasn't. It's actually pulled us apart.
And it's pretty empty too. Pretty empty.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
vapid. You know what I mean? So people want to be heard. They want to be known. They want to be appreciated. And there's all these growth opportunities. I was there filming one day, and I'm just about to walk out, and somebody says, "Oh, the lady's going to come, and they're going to do the choir practice." I said, "Well, I guess we're not going to leave now." God, they were warming up and singing, and I had a long drive ahead of me, but it's like I didn't want to leave. I felt, oh my gosh, this is fun. I didn't want to be the observer. I wanted to be part of it. So many people want to volunteer. I mean, there's doctors that volunteer and all kinds of people that volunteer because it's joyful.
Tell me about the film. It's complete, correct? It's done?
Yeah, it's complete. Yeah. It's a 28-minute film. We've been showing it around. I just showed it at the Minnesota American Indian Institute for Alcohol and Drug Studies in Minnesota. And I showed my other film, Journeys on the Red Road, there last year. People really liked it. And now I'm doing outreach, trying to get screenings together. So, I'm looking forward to do some outreach. I got some conferences. And, I'm looking for other venues to be able to show this and screen it. But the screening is important because it brings up a lot of emotions. But what's really important is the post-screening discussion, where people can get into the details and start looking at what's going on here, what can we do here, how do we appreciate this? I mean, how do we grow this into something that organically works for our community? So that's been the real fun. This is where it really happens. This is where the rubber meets the road. Bringing it out to people and having them interact with it, and having a social impact, interacting with people, because when you see that, it disinhibits them, and they start talking with each other. They never even met each other. Putting people together to find out how something like this would be viable in their community.
Where and when will this be available? I mean, can people find out on your website?
If you want to do a screening in your city, or you have a group of people, they can contact me, and we can work it out. That's now my most favorite thing, is talking to people, figuring out what their need is, when they want to show it, how they want to show it. They want to show it online or virtually with a Zoom conference. They want to show it in person in an auditorium.
Your website is touchpointproductions.com. Is that the best way for people to access that?
Right, yeah. Or they can just write me directly at pstouchpoint@gmail.com. I can send them a form and stuff like that really kind of help detail what they're going for, how they would screen it, do they have projection equipment, what the audience is.
Is there a way for listeners to access a preview, a trailer, if you will, of the film?
Well, I could send you a trailer.
What I will do is I'll put it in the show notes so people will have a chance to see what we're talking about and get a flavor for the Recovery Café. And I'm going to try to dig up in the audio archives what we did 9 years ago there at the Recovery Café, and maybe put that in a future episode of Recovery Coast to Coast. But it's fascinating, and it's open to all. It is so inclusive that it's stunning and beautiful.
Yeah, I've just done a lot of work in this area, and basically I just finished 6 half-hour films in 6 years. Just did it all on determination, essentially, because I didn't have a sponsor. I just said, I'm going to do it, and that's it. I just really love being around recovering people and hearing all the miraculous ways they figured out how to, transform the muck and the mire into the lotus flower. How that's impossible. And then you just see it happen. You go, that's miraculous.
Yeah. I often say that there's no such thing as coincidence. It's God incidence. And when I look at and hear you tell your story, and it goes back on the recovery side to Sheila Ray Charles, who I met quite a while ago, and she's since passed away. But she was a dynamic woman in recovery. And even in her death, she has given a gift. And that gift the gift continues to give as you continue to do films and get further into the recovery field.
Yeah, I pretty much devoted my life to it. It's my vocation, and I guess there's no vacation from the vocation. I just do it
there sure
because
isn't.
I'm not trying to compete with anybody else. My films are not going to be on Netflix. I'm not going to get an Academy Award. Actually, I really don't care. This is more incredible than any award that I can possibly get, because my whole career has been dedicated to helping people get the message and then go, oh my God, I didn't know that. It's like, it's okay. We get it right by doing it wrong. And then you take that and you go, oh, I see. It's like, where we go.
Well, I encourage you to continue not just carrying the message, but sending the message for hope and recovery. Again, I want to tell our listeners to check the show notes. There will be a link in the show notes to a preview trailer of the film about the Recovery Cafe. Paul, I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you continued success, one film at a time.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a lot of fun.
Once again, I want to remind listeners, if you go to our show notes, you will find information on how to access more information about the Recovery Cafe, about Paul Steinbroner's work. And you will also find a trailer for his latest film about the Recovery Cafe. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, and as long as you have been in continuous recovery for a year or more, drop us a note, would you? recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Coming up next, actor DickVan Dyke will share some personal thoughts on generosity of spirit. That's happening in just 30 seconds.
Alcohol is running your life. You want help, but can't take time away from work to get it. Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown M Ranch outpatient programs have helped thousands recover from addiction without losing time on the job. Nationally recognized for innovative, effective, and affordable treatment programs, Sundown M Ranch will help you put your life back on track. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now, as promised, here is iconic actor and a guy in long-term recovery, DickVan Dyke, on having a generosity of spirit.
If a man speaks or acts with pure thought, happiness follows him like a shadow that never leaves him. Buddha. As we become increasingly willing to live on a spiritual plane, our motives in many areas gradually change. In the past, when we were charitable to others, for example, it was usually with the expectation of receiving something in return. We frequently gave to others in order to look good and to win their approval. We offered gifts as a way to gain control or buy favors. We were generous out of a sense of obligation or because we needed to get off the hook. Now that we are progressing spiritually and taking actions to become free of self-centeredness and self-seeking, the path is growing narrower. We find that we want to, indeed we must, be honest, above board, and pure of motive in all our affairs. No longer can we get by with behavior disguised as one thing, yet calculated to achieve something else and benefit us in some way. Today, when we reach out to others, we do so unconditionally. Most often, we're motivated by a generosity of spirit. There are no strings attached to our actions. We are anxious to pass on those same gifts that God, through others, has so freely given to us: love, understanding, patience, and compassion. Thought for today: our motives speak more loudly than our words or actions.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed our podcast, we invite you to please share it with your friends. Share it with others via social media, or simply tell someone about it. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Now, also, please hit the subscribe or follow button because it's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. Remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here is a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals are available as well. 1-800-622-4357. And we encourage you to check out findsupport.gov. It's a fairly new website designed for individuals, families, and friends. It includes how to pay for treatment, including low-cost and free treatment options. You can find healthcare support there as well, how to help someone else, or find help for yourself. It's all in one place, findsupport.gov. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout-out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.